recognize the Chair of Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. President. The Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee will have a very brief voting session 20 minutes after the completion of our walking through the hall and seeing the late President Lyon State.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Chair of Budget and Taxation.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nothing today.
All right. Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Chair of Judicial Proceedings.
Thank you, Mr. President. Nothing today. We'll be meeting after session at 1 o'clock on Tuesday.
Thank you, Senator. Are there any further announcements before we move into our second part of the session today? It does not appear so. If we could ask the governor to join us, if we're ready. So, senators, we have a really special day today. While certainly death is always a sad thing, I think there is nothing more that Senator Thomas V. Mike Miller would have wanted than to celebrate his life, and that's what today is about. And we're going to begin by having somebody who knew him maybe longer than any of us knew him, someone that has seen the ups and the downs, the governor of this great state, and we'd like to welcome Governor Larry Hogan to provide remarks. So welcome, Governor.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to have this opportunity to be able to say a few words about my lifelong friend, Thomas V. Mike Miller, Jr. First Lady and I extend our deepest sympathies to Mike's family, to his incredible wife, Patty, whose application for sainthood I've already submitted to the Holy Father, to their children, Tommy, Missy, Michelle, Melanie, and Amanda, to Mike's 8 surviving brothers and sisters, who got the experience of having Mike as the oldest brother, and of course to those 15 wonderful grandchildren. What an incredible father, grandfather, and brother you had, and how truly blessed your family was. President Ferguson, thank you for placing President Miller's portrait right here in the back of the Senate chamber, where he's staring at me right now with that smile of his, with that twinkle in his blue eyes. I've seen that look many times over the years, like he's getting ready to lambaste me if I go off course, maybe say something a little too partisan. So in Mike's honor, I'm going to start out by saying something a little partisan. As hard as this may be to believe, Mike Miller actually got his start in politics campaigning for Republicans. I'm not sure where he went off track after that, but the year was 1962. Mike was 19 years old. He was campaigning for his Clinton neighbor, Frank Small, Jr., who was the Republican nominee for governor against J. Millard Tawes. And my dad was helping to run Frank Small's campaign. So Mike had 2 main jobs in that campaign. One was to get Frank Small elected governor, and also to occasionally babysit 5-year-old me. Mike went 0 for 2 that year, and that may explain why after that election he became a lifelong, committed, passionate Democrat. So as a kid, I was lucky enough to grow up looking up to and getting to know Mike Miller. It was the beginning of a friendship that lasted nearly 6 decades, a friendship which survived some tough partisan elections on opposite teams, and maybe some, shall I say, overheated and colorful discussions over a few hard-fought legislative battles. But ours was a friendship which only grew deeper when I got sick with cancer, and then even more so when he did. And that's not to say we didn't have our moments. I mean, we had some beauties, trust me. When Mike was your opponent, you knew you were in for a battle. But when he was on your side, was really on your side. We still spoke quite often, even as his health declined, and as recently as just last week. As always, Mike didn't hesitate to let me know what I was doing wrong, but also how much he appreciated our relationship. Mostly he wanted to reflect on how far we two Prince George's County boys had come. And that's what always motivated Mike. He never forgot where he came from. Mike Miller was a great husband, father, and grandfather. He was a patriotic American, a proud Marylander, a lover of history, the most powerful senator, a prominent lawyer, a devout Catholic, and a passionate Terp, though not necessarily always in that order. Sitting on the court with him at Terps basketball games were some of my greatest moments with him. Thomas V. Mike Miller, Jr. worked for half a century in this historic State House. 46 years right here in this very chamber. This is the first time since 1974, when I was in high school, that a session of the Senate of Maryland is meeting without Mike Miller as a member. As a student of history, Mike's profound impact on the Senate and on the state of Maryland is truly historic. We can see Mike Miller's legacy everywhere, not just in this chamber, but throughout the entire state of Maryland. Public education, higher education, the Chesapeake Bay, our healthcare system, all bear the indelible mark of Thomas V. Mike Miller, Jr. But it is perhaps right here, in this august body, in this chamber, where we see his greatest legacy. And on these walls, he forever joins Peka, Stone, Chase, Berta Welcome, and Charles of Carrollton. Within these historic walls, his indomitable spirit will live on forever, along with the values that he cherished and lived by. Respect for tradition, separation of powers, the dignity of every Marylander, and the greatness of the state of Maryland that he loved so much. And so, Mike, it is fitting that you were brought here to these hallowed halls before your final rest. Welcome home, my friend. On behalf of all the people of a grateful state of Maryland, we say thank you. Your legacy will not ever be forgotten. God bless you, and may you rest in peace.
Thank you so much, Mr. Governor. Thank you for being here with us and sharing those thoughts. And members, we will journalize all of the remarks today so that we have a forever record of today's events. This is not something that we will ever experience again, this ability to give tribute to somebody who spent 50 years improving the lives of millions and millions and millions of Marylanders. I've thought a lot about this moment for the last year, what it would be like, what would happen. And I keep going back to some of of Mike's own advice to me. He said, in these important moments, you don't write it all down, don't read the speech. Just speak from the heart. Just speak from the heart. Which I always try to do, and try to give my own sort of personal opinions. But there were moments where, I felt like the moment called for a more formal presentation. And I said, Mike, how did you deal with this over the years? 33 years that you were able to, go to different events. How did you just not have prepared remarks for everything? And he said, well, look, I blew it a couple times, but if you just rely on your humor, then you'll get your way through. You just make a couple jokes and you'll get your way through. And I looked back to him and I said, well, Mike, I'm not that funny though. And he said, well, then you're kind of screwed. So here we are, and we're just going to speak from the heart, because I think that's what he would want. That's why he was able to lead this chamber for 33 years, is because he was who he was. He told everyone in the moment exactly how he felt. But I got to start with that Thomas V. Mike Miller Jr. Thomas V. Mike Miller Jr. It's quite a name, right? Everyone focuses on the Junior or the Mike. What they don't focus on, and something I've thought a lot about over the years, and especially over this last week, is the Thomas part. Thomas is a New Testament name. That means twin. We're going to hear a lot of stories today about how Thomas V. Mike Miller Jr. has no twin. There is no one like him. There has never been anyone like him. There may not be anyone like him in the future. So why twin? What is the representation there? I think what made Mike Mike was the duality of the way that he approached this work. The ability to be two people or three people or four people, depending on what the moment was and what the moment called for. The governor just said it, and it couldn't be more true. I've experienced it myself. He could be your greatest ally in a fight, the single greatest person standing by your side. He also could be the toughest opponent you could ever imagine if you were on the other side. That became pretty personal this year as we were starting to talk about what session would look like for this 2021 session in the middle of a pandemic, in which almost every conversation we had in this last year ended with, I'm so sorry. I am so, so sorry. I've just handed you a really bad hand. And so I had thought a lot about, how am I going to tell Mike about these preparations? How are we going to, we did a lot of studying, and we talked to health experts. We'd come up with all these procedures and protocols, and I knew that Mike would really care deeply. And so I went down, and this is the last time that I saw him in person, down to his Clinton office, his law office, and walked through this PowerPoint and went through all of the pieces. And he finished, and he just said, I'm so proud of you. I can't believe how much work's gone into this. And I'll never forget that feeling of walking out of that office and just knowing, I think I've done it right. I think I've gotten there. Fast forward a month, and our wonderful Cenopods were installed inside the chamber. And I thought, well, I got to follow up with Mike to make sure that, he sees this. And at this point, we weren't quite sure whether he was going to be coming back or not. And so they had finally gotten installed, and I stood up here and took a picture and sent a text to him and said, just wanted to make sure you saw, we talked about this plexiglass. And he didn't write back. And I thought, that's odd. He's calling me every other day, and I haven't heard from him. Another day goes by, I hadn't heard from him. And so I picked up the phone, and I called. And the other side of the equation, the other Mike, Bill, Mr. President, you've made our Senate floor look like a GD kindergarten classroom. In only the way that Mike could. He'd been stewing on it for a day and a half to give that piece of advice. That was Mike. That's who he was. He'd tell you how it is. He also had this duality in his Senate family and his blood family. He had to manage and be the leader for 175 senators over his time period as president of this Senate. Think about that, 175 members. Each and every one of them has their own story, their own experience, their own relationship, because that's where he focused, was on the people. He treated them like they were brothers and sisters, like they were friends, despite the politics, despite the partisanship. The Senate was that family. And at the exact same time, He had an incredible wife, 5 children, 15 grandchildren, that any moment that he had, he could experience the love of what makes life great, his family. But they were these two realities that often competed with each other. And in these last few months, particularly in these last 6 months, there were many times, where Mike would call and say, Bill, don't forget, focus on your wife and kids. Don't forget. It can get overwhelming, because he knew how hard that struggle was to balance the work for the people and balance the work for the people that really matter. We all know he was a student. He studied history, was a voracious reader. We'll hear that many, many times. And I think that's fascinating, because often people sort of think about it as a historian as just wanting to learn and know more. But I think it was different for Mike. For Mike, history was a way to study people. It was the idea that you could learn about yourself by learning from others and really understanding how the time shaped the situations. And that in any given moment, there's a lesson to be learned from many, 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 many years past. Because these situations change, but the people don't. The ideas get recycled. It was learning, and he just had this passion to know people, individual senators, his constituents, his businesses. He just wanted to learn. But then on the flip side, he also cherished being a teacher, and each of us experienced that. Standing up here, telling about history of what's on the walls, or Verda Welcome and his experiences of her fighting for civil rights, and how deeply held relationships drove progress in the state of Maryland. There was this other duality that he lived with: the country boy from Clinton versus the kingmaker in Annapolis. When you think about his existence as the country lawyer from Clinton, Maryland, I think there's no better example of this duality of kingmaker and country boy than just in 2019, when the former President of the United States, Bill Clinton, came to honor Mike at our Societies of Senate Past. And for those of you who were there, that is a moment I will never, ever forget. You have one of the greatest orators of our time, President Bill Clinton, who gave these remarkable, personal, deeply held remarks. And then you had Thomas V. Mike Miller stand up and wipe the floor and just absolutely grab a hold of a room, make them laugh, make them cry, and even have the audacity to call the former President of the United States, who's standing right next to him, a redneck. This is the Mike Miller that we all knew and loved, and make everyone laugh. It's remarkable. But I think the piece that is which I will most cherish, is the duality between the public Senator Miller and the private Senator Miller. When I first got here, he sort of kindly called me the baby senator from Baltimore, right? I sort of had this image of President Miller. He controlled everything. It was all his decisions. This is, it was, if it happened in Annapolis, it was because Mike Miller. If it didn't, it was because of Mike Miller. It was this idea that he stood up there, he was confident, he led the chamber, he would, it was all through these walls that everything happened. And that was a very well-curated and created perception, because leadership requires confidence and dealing in hope. But there is a very private Mike Miller that I think less people see. And I really had the unbelievable opportunity over this last year to experience it personally and deeply see that more private side that cared so deeply about every issue, that worried about this institution on a daily basis, that would stay up at night running through his Rolodex of senators and issues and places and geography. Where can we move? Where can we fix? What can we do better? Did we get this wrong? Can we fix it? Is there an amendment? Is there a way? People didn't see that side. They didn't see the deep personal feeling that he had for each and every one of his colleagues. That's what made Mike successful, is that ability to exude confidence for this institution, because he knew that over time the politics will change, the partisanship will change, the issues will change. But this institution, this Senate of Maryland, this is what stands the test of time. That's who he was. That's what he believed. And that's why we're here today. That's why we get to celebrate an incredibly great man who was complex and challenging, but whose legacy will last for generations. Now, how do you finish in a situation? How do you truly honor an individual like Thomas V. Mike Miller? Well, it's in a way that I think he would have wanted. In 1992, he created an award, the First Citizen Award. It was based off of Charles Carroll of Carrollton. He could have picked anyone in the world to create this award and name on behalf of the Senate to give the highest honor that the Senate can give. But he chose Charles Carroll of Carrollton. And this would be no tribute to Mike Miller if there were not a bit of history. For those of you who are unaware, one of our signers of our Declaration of Independence, the reason it is called the First Citizen is because Charles Carroll of Carrollton wrote in the Maryland Gazette regularly about the importance of a separate branch of government, the legislature, why we needed independence, and the legislature was that branch that needed the strength and defending. He was also an individual born in Annapolis, died in Baltimore, who had the opportunity of being both a state legislator and a U.S. senator. One of the very, very few people in the history of this country to have done so, because it was made unlawful to do both. Charles Carroll of Carrollton chose to resign from the U.S. Senate to remain as a Maryland state senator because he believed that this place, this institution, was where the real work got done. In 1992, our friend, Mike Miller, created an award that's been given out every year. This year, we intended to give it to him in person. Unfortunately, given our circumstances, we will be offering the award posthumously. And we're going to add a bit. For the first time, and from this point forward, hopefully, we'll be providing a medal for each of the First Citizens Award, to which President Emeritus Thomas V. Mike Miller will be the first recipient, which I think is only fitting. And so when we process out of the chamber today, my hope is that senators will join me so that we as a body can present an award that meant so much to Mike Miller because it represented everything that lasts, the things that really matter. It represents this place, this space, in this most difficult and divided time. So with that, I want to conclude by simply saying to our friend, President Emeritus Thomas V. Mike Miller, to the senator from the 27th District, while your journey is a journeying sine die, please know that this state, this institution, this chamber, this body, and these people are forever grateful for the leadership and legacy that you leave behind. Rest in peace, rest in power, and rest in love. Thank you all. We next have a few presentations virtual, and of course, if this were different circumstance, we would this might be a very different venue. But given the circumstances that we are in with the pandemic, we've tried to make the best of a very unique situation, and so we are joined remotely first by the youngest ever, to which he, I think, specifically wanted to be reminded, Senate President of the Senate of Maryland, the Majority Leader of the House of Representatives, and Congressman Hoyer, who was Senator from 1967 to 79 and was Senator Miller's first Senate President from 1975 to 79. I think the story that they both tell each other whenever they are around is that every time Senator Miller ran for election, he and Majority Leader Hoyer ran on the same ticket. If we could please recognize Majority Leader Hoyer.
Mike Miller was my friend for over 50 years. So I knew Mike Miller very, very well, and he was an exceptional human being, one of a kind in many ways. Tough and gruff, smart as a whip, but also kind and considerate of others when he wanted to be. And when he thought others were trying to take advantage of people, he was right there in the front line, making sure it didn't happen. Mike Miller will long be remembered as not only an extraordinary legislator, an extraordinary politician, but an extraordinary human being as well.
We thank the Majority Leader for his remarks. Next, we have another former senator who was extremely close to our dear friend, former senator and cabinet secretary, who Senator Miller credited for designing the Miller Senate Office Building, and most recently and most relevantly, was one of two senators that Senator Miller claimed credit for flipping political parties. With that, we will hand over to Secretary and Senator NEALL.
It's a privilege and the highest of honors to have been asked to speak on this solemn occasion. There are many who are more worthy than I to give these remarks. It's my hope that my words may capture some of the things they may have said. We extend our profound sympathy to Patty and Mike's family and offer our heartfelt thanks for the loving care they rendered to Mike during his long illness. It was a comfort to all of Mike's friends that he was always surrounded by love and support. Mike Miller was the most fascinating person I ever met. He was a unique combination of intellect, personality, energy, passion, humor, and guile. All of this was veneered with an outsized personality which craved action and the company of people. His moods could change as quickly as Maryland weather. That his mind was always at work. That mind, what a thing of beauty. He could recall obscure snippets of history, tell you the flip side of a title of a record from the 1950s, quote passages from his favorite books, and assemble his latest legislative strategy simultaneously. I envied his command of profanity, a true art form. He would use all the words and all the parts of speech and would weave them into a ribald tapestry, a torrent of words that would fill the air and linger. True poetry. It was symphonic, awe-inspiring. It was Mike. He had other qualities. No one was more formidable in legislative combat. No one was more persuasive in crucial situations. No one was more faithful in friendship, and no one was more kind in tender moments. He treated the members of the Senate like family. He attended thousands of events, fundraisers, weddings, funerals, family gatherings. He was also a prolific note writer, congratulatory, condolences, whatever the occasion. Mike was fun to be with. The Senate sessions, the parties, the dinners, the card games, the trips, and for me, the conversations. We all have our own memories of Mike. One of mine involves his hair. Before Mike allowed his hair to go white, he struggled for years to color his hair. The dye did the job, but there was a consistency problem. PJ Hogan, Mac Middleton, and I would speculate each week as to what color his hair would be when he took the rostrum. Mike loved to laugh, and he had three types. A furtive, under-his-breath chortle that was just for you, an everyday vernacular ha-ha-ha for small talk and polite company, and then a throw-his-head-back, body-contorting, primal scream, which we all loved, even if it was at our expense. He played golf enthusiastically, but he was haunted by the fact that he could never be as good as Patty. Patty was Mike's loving companion for nearly 60 years. Her love and support was a big reason for Mike Miller's success. It had to be difficult to live with a human cyclone, but Patty made it look easy, with charm, class, and good humor. For many of us, a world without Mike Miller is a lesser world. Less fun, less exciting, less stimulating. His passing leaves a void in many of our lives that can't be filled, only soothed by loving memories. President Biden, no stranger to grief, said that to heal, one has to remember. I will remember, as will we all. President Biden also said that one never gets over the loss of a loved one, but there will come a time when a memory will bring a smile to your face before tears to your eyes. I anxiously await that day, if ever it comes. I will not dwell on his many accomplishments. They are part of history. I would just offer this. Nothing of consequence was enacted during his presidency without his support. His storied tenure in the General Assembly comprised over 20% of Maryland's history as a state. He helped thousands of people, one by one, during his 5-decade career, and millions more by his legislative vision and leadership. His body of work will stand unsurpassed and unequal for all time. Like Casey Stengel used to say, you can look it up. I must say a word about the special people who staffed Mike throughout the years. Mike was both mentor and tormentor. He loved them, but it was often tough love. Yet each of them had a special relationship with Mike, and I offer condolences to them all. It's wonderful that Mike's portrait hangs in the Senate chamber. No one is more deserving. I can envision future Senate presidents pointing to it and telling the assembled about the legendary Mike Miller, the Lion of the Maryland Senate, who ruled the rostrum for over 3 decades. And of course, they'll be doing their work in the Miller Senate office building. One of Mike's true gifts was perspective. He always knew exactly where we were on the road to change. Like a skilled railroad engineer, he had his hand on the throttle of change and moved us fast enough to overcome obstacles, yet slow enough so as not to derail the train. Mike often said, I cannot predict the future, but I can tell you what's going to happen. Mike made it happen over and over and over. We will all miss what I called Miller Minutes, where he stopped the Senate proceedings to treat us to a historical vignette, his way of sharing his vast knowledge about our beloved state. Mike had a special love for his alma mater, the University of Maryland. His support was both strident and perpetual. College Park and the entire university system are adorned with many Miller-inspired improvements. As Mike confronted his final days, his approach was vintage Miller. He was open, candid, and matter of fact. In his inimitable way, Mike took care of his personal business, gradually withdrew from the Senate arena, spent countless hours consoling us and saying his goodbyes, and when all was done, he simply stepped aside, showing great dignity and courage throughout. To Mike, this was not about him, but about us. Our grief, our anxiety, and our feelings. Through illness and pain, Mike conducted his passing according to his plan. In the interest of full disclosure, when the priest gets to the point in tomorrow's service about one of God's sheep returning to the fold, Mike will no doubt be one of the Creator's most willful and rambunctious sheep. How does one say goodbye to such a dear friend? How does one properly thank someone for all he did for others? Mike would insist that we have already given him all the thanks and all the farewells anyone had a right to expect. His only expectation is that we continue the work, care for each other, and live our lives to the fullest. That's Mike's wish for us. So I will defy Mike Miller one more time by saying, farewell, Mr. President. We shall all miss you terribly. We are deeply grateful for all you have done for our beloved state and for us. Thank you for leading and teaching us. Thank you for the thousands of memories you made for those of us who were fortunate enough to have spent time in your presence. Please know that we will hold you in our hearts and fondly remember our time together. Farewell, Mike Miller. We love you, we miss you, and we will cherish your memory. I will look for you when I reach the other side. Until then, Rest in peace, my friend. Rest in peace.
Well said. Well said. Our final virtual remarks will be from another one of our former colleagues, a colleague that President Emeritus Miller put me next to in my very first year, and I think it was to put under her watchful eyes. Someone that chaired our Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs Committee and who was incredibly great friends with President Miller when they were not at each other's throats. With that, let's hear from Senator Joan Carter Conway.
To Patty, the Miller family, and the Senate body. President Thomas V. Mike Miller is known and respected nationally for his unwavering service to the legislature, more specifically, the Maryland Senate. His commitment to preserving the stability and economic viability of the state of Maryland was one of Mike's highest priorities, notwithstanding his immense love for his family that he cherished. But let me tell you what you don't know. I and Mike had a love-hate relationship, exclusively relating to legislative issues, but what he did not know, I was as stubborn and determined as he was. The president would inform me of which bills he wanted on the floor and which ones he didn't. I respected his position as my president, but I would not comply. Mike was always concerned about the decorum of the august body of the Senate and indicated the bills were too controversial, not to mention the exchange of many expletives that we would exchange. Mike would become visibly upset when I would kill the governor's bills. I would agree with Mike to make a motion to reconsider the bill only if, and only if, he accepted my amendments, which made it a much better bill. I have a special place in my heart for Mike. As conservative as I thought he was, but he was really a kind, deeply caring, and loving person. But that was not the image he wanted to project. He was responsible for my ascension in the Senate, appointing me as the first Black woman to chair a standing committee. Also, not only was it in the Maryland Senate, I was the first Black woman chair in the Maryland General Assembly. Mike, I will miss you, your texts, your phone calls, our debates specifically as it relates to what is politically correct as opposed to doing what is right and just. He would respond, "You're right, but Maryland is not quite ready yet, John." In closing, I will share with you one of Mike's latest texts that he sent me. People will never know the scores of positive change that you insisted upon, fighting on behalf of your constituency and the changes that were made simply because of your presence. The hollow halls of the Maryland Senate will never be the same without Mike. Ditto. And Mike knows exactly what this is. Love you, my friend. Peace and eternal rest in the loving arms of our Savior.
As genuine as it gets. Chair recognizes the Majority Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. As I gathered my thoughts about what I would say today, I thought about a song we used to sing when I was involved in Girl Scouts, and it had the verse, "Make new friends but keep the old. One is silver and the other gold." Colleagues, a friendship with Mike Miller was pure gold. A friendship with Mike was one that guaranteed laughter, caring, loyalty, and maybe just a little profanity. That friendship did not guarantee blind loyalty, though. Friend or not, Mike was quick to let you know if you did or said something he didn't like, but he was just as quick to offer praise for your accomplishments. And perhaps most importantly, he was always there if you needed encouragement or a kind word when going through a difficult time. I had gallbladder surgery a couple weeks ago, and who was the first person that called me on the phone when I came up from the recovery room? It was Mike making sure that I was okay. The state of Maryland has lost its most devoted champion, but to my colleagues, both past and present, and I, who were lucky enough to call Mike a friend, we have lost a personal cheerleader, a confidant, and a man who was pure gold. There's an old saying, be the things you loved most about the people who are gone. One of the many things I loved about Mike was his drive to ensure that the Maryland Senate worked together as a family, with each of us having the other's backs, and I hope in his honor that we in the Senate can continue that. It has been so special to me during my time in the Senate, and Mike has always really encouraged us to be there for each other and be friends. Even though we argue at times, we're still there to cover each other. And I hope all of us will take the things we love the most about Mike and use them to comfort us and make us do just a little bit better each and every day. And in that way, we celebrate and remember our friend, Thomas V. Mike Miller. God bless you, Mike.
Well said. Thank you, Madam Majority Leader. Chair recognizes the Minority Leader.
Thank you. Senator Miller and I started off on very partisan battlefield, but over the years we both mellowed and became good friends. Given that I served with Senator Miller for a decade and a half, I want to share a couple stories with the body that will give you some insight from the minority standpoint about the man, the myth, the former Senate President, Mike Miller. My first meeting with him was after my election in 2006. We had just finished a bitter election where I won by a scant 600 votes, and he asked to meet with me before the General Assembly met. Now understand, one of Mike's strengths in building alliances was to tell you what you wanted to hear, but this was a stretch even for Mike. The first thing he said to me was, "Welcome to the Senate. I just wanted to let you know I had nothing to do with those negative campaign mailers against you." At first, I didn't know how to respond to that statement, but I said, winning is an amazing healing balm, so we're good. Another one of my early interactions with Senate President Miller demonstrated he didn't let battles stop him from working with every senator. Neither of us were very bashful in our communication styles. We had a unique way of getting each other's attention. I remember one session in the early years, I wanted to get the president's attention over a few issues. Imagine the setting. The Senate was buzzing with excitement for a new session. The script had been written for how things were to proceed. Senators' friends and families were seated all across the floor, and it was a festive scene. Then came the formality of voting in the new Senate president. Then the vote was called. Votes of green assembled all over the board. Then there was one red vote. It seemed like an attorney waiting for the clerk to take the call. To get his attention, I decided not to vote for him for being Senate president on opening day. I remember a page on the floor saying, "Senator, you hit the wrong button. You hit the wrong button." Then they realized it wasn't a mistake. That was followed by my seatmate, then Senator Barry Glassman, slowly moving away from me, saying he didn't want any of that. Needless to say, I got his attention. In fact, I was called into his office shortly afterwards. After his blood pressure went down, we had a great talk and moved on. Then, to my surprise, I got a phone call every year thereafter asking for my vote. Being in the minority party had its challenges, and it should be noted and recognized that Senator Miller worked with the minority party. He would respect and listen to the minority party, and I think that's a big reason Annapolis is not like Washington, D.C. If the minority party doesn't feel like they have a voice in the process, then it creates a fertile environment for partisan quarreling and nasty politics. Senator Miller loved the Senate and wanted to function the best possible way for the people of Maryland, and we are grateful for his leadership in working together. One last story is about Senate President Miller interacting with people. Living close to Annapolis, I would frequently have visitors in the Senate. There wasn't a time when I saw Senator Miller in the hallway or the chamber that he wouldn't stop by and make my constituents feel special and throw in a little history lesson on the side. He had a special way of making people feel welcome and part of this great institution. Senate President Miller was tough as nails in leading the Senate, but he was also a kind and tender person. Even though we often disagreed on policy, he was so kind to me and my family. I remember one session my son worked a bill to promote the youth in our state, and he walked the bill around to get all 47 senators to co-sponsor it. As the bill came to the floor, Senator Miller invited my son to come to the floor. He was always like that to the Senate family members. After the bill passed, Senator Miller asked his staff to print out the vote count. He wrote a sweet note on it and signed it and handed it to my son. My now 26-year-old son still has that note. That kindness was not always in public sight, but we as senators knew it and so appreciated it. Senate President Miller was a once-in-a-generation politician. There was no one like him. There will be no one like him in the future. At the end of the day, we are a family, and when we heard the passing of Senator Miller, both Republicans and Democrats felt a great loss. We will miss you, Mike, but we will never forget you or the positive impact you had on our state.
Thank you so much, Senator. Chair recognizes the Chair of Education, Health, and Environmental Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. President. About a week ago, there was an article about the freshman class from 2 years ago. The freshman class, particularly those freshmen who Mike Miller worked to defeat, who he opposed. And he wanted to meet with them and bring them into the Senate fold. Well, I can tell those colleagues that I too was opposed by Senate President Miller when I first ran. So you weren't alone. And I didn't even have an incumbent that I was running against. Mike actually recruited people to run against me, as some of you know, until there was a very frank discussion one June day at Bull Roast in Largo, Maryland, and then it stopped. And then Mike welcomed me in as well. You know, Mike and I had differences on ideology, on politics, on processes, and I think if we could characterize the first number of years, you were dealing with two hardheads who butted heads. And frequently I would challenge Mike on the floor or in caucus, and for those keeping track, he had the winning record and I didn't. He was the master and I was the rookie. But over time, I learned a lot from Mike. A great deal, as all of us did. You know, one day, before a delegation meeting, we were meeting, I think, on the first floor of the James building. And it was Senator Green from Bowie and the late Senator Bucky Trotter, Art Dorman, and others. And it was before the meeting, and Mike suggested something. And I naively said, "Can you do that?" He said, "Paul, if you have the votes, you can do anything." It was vintage Mike Miller, as we know Mike. Now, sometime later, there was an attempted palace coup, an attempt to overthrow the king. And one day during the tumult, Mike called me at my office. And he said, "I'm just checking in." Well, that was Mike Miller-Rees for "I'm counting my votes." Not surprising. Eventually, the conversation got around to, "Where are you going to be, Paul? Are you going to be with them? Are you going to be with me?" And I said, "Look, Mike, the people running against you are pretty conservative. If they were promoting a progressive agenda, you can bet damn sure I'd be with them. But the fact is, I'd like to stay with a conservative I knew and I have a relationship with." And Mike's answer was very interesting. He said, "You know what, Paul? That's what I expected you to say." He knew me. He knew what I would probably do. And sometime later, even though I continued to challenge him in public, he supported me for delegation chair and chair of one of the special committees. He didn't have to do it. He didn't have to do it. You know, eventually our adversarial relationship turned to one of mutual respect. I respected what he advocated for, University of Maryland system and College Park and full funding. He fully got behind the Thornton Commission. And when he realized we needed a gas tax, he got behind a gas tax. And as you know, Mike is not a tax and spend liberal. And I really respected that and appreciated that. And even when Kerwin was just beginning, he said, I'm committed to this. Look, he was a master politician, we know that. He was also a psychologist and a sociologist. And while his advanced degree was in law, I think he should have had a PhD in the other fields as well. He knew what you were thinking, what your emotions were, the buttons that you put that pushed you, and he also knew what moved people, groups of people, and the sociology of group dynamics. He understood that, and that's what made him a great politician. He was also very loyal. He was super loyal. You know, Rashawn Baker, my friend and former county executive, Prince George's County, told a story just the other day. He said, look, Mike would harangue him, attack him, criticize him, and at the end of the conversation, he said, we'll get it done. If Mike said, we'll get it done, he'd get it done. And I was one of those beneficiaries in the last 4 or 5 or 6 years to hear those words, we'll get it done. But we know Mike was a complicated character. A lot of people, a lot of us, would approach him with an ask. Lobbyists would approach him with an ask. And of course, he couldn't accede to all of them. So the ask would happen in his office back here, and you'd get this vague nod, which was not a commitment, although some people would leave those meetings with their head over their skis thinking they had what they wanted. There's a difference between we'll get it done and uh-huh. And we all learned that, and probably a few times it saddened and hurt us. But just as, you know, the adversarial relationship turned to mutual respect, the mutual respect turned to friendship. And I never thought that would happen, I have to tell you. You know, we sat close by at the Terp games, particularly prior to the last year when he had trouble making the steps and he sat with the governor on the floor. He was a couple rows apart from me. He was, I think, row 8, section 102. I could be wrong. And Joan and I would go, and he'd say hello, and we'd talk, and he really liked Joan a lot, I think sometimes more than myself. But at halftime, we'd talk basketball, we'd talk politics. And then, obviously, over a couple years ago when Mike was diagnosed, which changed a lot in the state and for he and his family and us, sometime later, Joan was diagnosed with cancer, a different type, albeit. And he'd always ask me, how's she doing? And she was undergoing treatment, and Mike was undergoing treatment. And as late as either 10 or 12 days before his passing, he called me one afternoon or one evening. And he said, I'm thinking about Joan, I'm thinking about you. How you guys doing? How are you doing? You know, I think of her memory. And I have to tell you, it was a pretty emotional phone call for both of us. You know, I asked him about his health, and he said, look, I don't know if it's 2 days, 2 weeks, or 2 months, which was the exact same phrase I heard a doctor tell me about my wife. So Mike really cared, as a number of people have said. He really cared about people, and he was loyal to people. You know, there was a news reporter, columnist in New York 80, 90 years ago, a guy named Damon Runyon. And people talked about a Runyon-type character. And, you know, in some ways we have our own Runyon-type character in Dan Roderick, who talks about the everyday person, the common person in the Baltimore Sun. And this is what Dan said about Runyon. He didn't write about the major political issues of the day, but how people worked, played, dreamed, and schemed. He put flesh and blood where they had been only the vaguest outline of humanity. And Runyon said about himself, when he defined a character, someone distinctive, colorful, and interesting. Distinctive, colorful, and interesting. That defines Mike Miller. And it was that character, that person who was distinctive, colorful, and interesting, who spent his life serving the state of Maryland. The state will miss him. We will miss him. And I can only say farewell, my friend.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the chair of the Finance Committee.
Now that I have the mic on, colleagues. Mike and I go back for a while. When I left the Environmental Matters Committee and came over with my seatmate and Van Hollen and there were 9 of us, all who came together in 1995, I believe. Mike sent for me while he was making up his mind where he would place me in terms of a committee assignment. And we talked about all kinds of things. And he questioned things I had done while on the Environmental Matters Committee. So I knew he had studied everybody's record and what we were like and how we behaved and so on. And he said, well, I'm going to put you with Walter Baker. I said, with Senator Baker? He says, yes, you're going on judicial proceedings. And of course, Senator Baker seemed like a crusty old man who would have nothing in common with a person like me, I thought. But he also, Mike, that is, told Baker, she's good serving on committees outside of the General Assembly. And so we need somebody on the Article 29 committee. And the code was numbered then instead of named. And so Mike says, if you want to show me what you're made of, I want you to serve on this committee. Well, I found out the committee met at night in Crownsville. And I had to, as a freshman here, get my husband to drive me down because I'm bad on the road at night. And so the Article 27 committee. But Mike would call me in from time to time just to check how I was doing and to talk to me and to see what else he would assign me to do. Altogether, Mike actually had me work on 19 either statewide or interstate committees and bodies. So I learned a lot about public policy sometimes from all the stuff that Mike had me doing. Mike was a poet. Mike was an intellectual. He would curse me out in a minute if he didn't like a bill that I had and he thought I was really pushing to get it through. And the last bill that Mike and I really interacted on was one where he called me in to offer me what he said was a friendly amendment. I don't like the GD bill, but I'm going to help you. And I was so glad he was saying he would help me that I accepted and the amendment went forth. And I realized later the amendment really made the bill worth nothing. But I had given my word. When Mike's mom died, I got to know him even better. And I went to her funeral and passed by the store that his family had run when he was a kid, where he sometimes worked. And I would check on him because he was close to his mom, and that kind of got to him. And I realized that Mike had a really deep spiritual side. And in a way, I thought so did I. And so we would talk about God and about religion and things like that. And I want to close by citing bits of poetry that Mike and I sometimes talked about. He had a truly metaphorical way of seeing life. And just a verse of William Wordsworth's ode to Imitations of Immortality, I think, tells me something about the way he really saw his boyhood and his youth. Our birth is but a sleep and a forgetting. The soul that rises with us, our life star, has had elsewhere its setting and cometh from afar. Not in entire forgetfulness and not in utter nakedness, but trailing clouds of glory do we come from God, who is our home. And then, I talked about Tennyson and his Crossing the Bar. Sunset, an evening star, and one clear call for me. And may there be no mourning at the bar when I put out to sea. But such a tide as moving seems asleep, too full for sound and foam, when that which drew from out the boundless deep turns again home. Twilight, an evening bell, and after that, the dark. And may there be no sadness or farewell when I embark. For though from out our bourne of time and place the flood may bear me far, I hoped to see my pilot face to face when I have crossed the bar. And then finally, given that Mike really was like the general in an army. He put things in place. He let us know how important it was, the impact we would have on posterity and what our job was. I'd like to close with words penned by John McCrae, a colonel in World War I in Flanders Fields. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks, still bravely singing, fly, scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you, with failing hands, we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. If you break faith with those of us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. Thank you, colleagues.
Thank you, Senator. Chair recognizes the Senator from Baltimore County.
Thank you, Mr. President. All of the things that I have been hearing are the things that have been going through my mind for the past few days, as everyone else. But I'm just going to begin as time goes by. If you want to hum that little song in your mind. One of my legislative aides said I'd never heard that song before. It made me feel pretty old. My journey with President Mike Miller began in 1994 on the first freshman tour after being elected to the House of Delegates. Very wet behind the ears, very nervous, I met Mike Miller, and it was a thrill. I had heard lots about him, good and bad. As time went by, watching and listening from the House of Delegates, I heard many stories about President Miller that made me shiver. It made me wonder if I ever wanted to go to the Senate. As time went by, I became a senator. I had the opportunity to really meet President Miller again. He was not the man I envisioned. He was caring, he was nice, had a great sense of humor, and he never twisted my arm too much. He was President Mike Miller, one of a kind who loved his Senate family. As time went by, I knew him, loved him, and I will miss him. I do know that every time I look in the mirror, I will think of him. He began with reddish-brown hair, just like me, and it went white, just like mine. I told him a while back that we could be brother and sister, and he just laughed. And as he would say, it is what it is.
Well said. Chair recognizes Senator from Baltimore County, 7th District.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, I started my career in the legislature over in the House. When you're in the House, you come out of the chamber, you look in the Senate, you don't dare step on the floor. You look at it in a kind of mystique way, and you see the big guy up there at the rostrum with that big gold ring he always had on his hand. I guess it was his class ring. And he was an intimidating guy. And I'd see him in the House chamber or the House building once in a while or walking across. Never said hi to him. You just kind of kept your distance because I was a House member. When I got elected to the Senate, I met with him for the first time, and I went in a little intimidated. I realized, hey, he's not that bad of a guy. And over the years, I found myself starting to like him. And that was hard. I'm like, I'm not supposed to like this guy. He's the enemy. We're supposed to hate each other and fight. But I found out I love the guy. Many of us did. I mean, he was a passionate person. He cared about us. He cared about our families. And he built relationships with us that meant a lot. And being in the Senate is an honor for each and every one of us. There's no doubt. But I got to tell you, unless you've served in the House, you don't know how great it is over here. Because he ran it different. He made sure every one of us was part of the team. 47 of us. No, we may not be rowing the right way or the same way, but we were at least, we knew we were part of the fight. We could say what we wanted, fight as hard as we can, as long as we respected each other. The fact that many of us on this side give floor reports, some of us have subcommittee chairmanships, it showed how much he respected us, as long as we respected him. When I became minority leader, I'd meet with him most mornings before session, walk in. Sometimes it'd be a 5-second conversation. Hey, boss, what's going on? What are we doing today? I'd kiddingly call him boss. Sometimes it was great. Other times it was not good. He'd be mad. He started reading social media posts. And I'd tell him, don't read the posts. Don't read them. They're just people out there. Just forget it. And he'd get mad. And we've heard about sometimes the language he would use. And he had the ability of taking 4-letter words you're not supposed to use and combine them together. He'd be in there yelling at me and, look at this. Look what they said about me. Rah, 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 rah. I'd be, Mike, we know it's different. Don't worry about it. But that was Mike. I mean, as we said, his temperature would change. He sat up there like a field marshal looking on a battlefield at us. And it was amazing to watch him. And, over my tenure sitting up front here, I could see how he worked. And I would notice that he would change, he'd go back and forth, and he could moderate the debate. And sometimes, if it was going a certain way, he was very good at taking us off kilter. He'd knock us off. So, especially this side of the aisle, we lost our focus. And it took us a while to get the momentum back. And I remember one time in particular, the minority whip and I went up there to meet with him. And we were a huge debate going on. We're in it. I'm like, Steve, let's talk to him. So we go up there, we're talking to him, and Mike's like, I get it, I understand. And all of a sudden he goes and he points to one of the statues up there and says, this marble came from the Eastern Shore or something. And my seatmate goes, really? And he starts talking about it. I'm like, hey, get back on subject. And that was Mike. He was amazing with the way he could command this chamber. He humanized it too. I mean, he stood up there, he was self-deprecating. I remember there were a couple, the day after Valentine's Day, when he would bring in the stuffed bears that Patty would give him, and he'd, tell us what happened and dance up there. That was the Mike we loved. Over the last year, I would speak to him every few weeks. I'd call him, and sometimes he'd call me. And, some of those conversations, when he answered the phone, he seemed strong. He was healthy, sounded great. Others, he seemed a little weak. 2 weeks ago, or 2.5 weeks ago, I called him. And when he answered the phone, I could tell. It was probably the last time I'd ever talked to him. It was a tough conversation. And we spoke for about 15 minutes, talked about all kinds of stuff, family. He always asked about my kids, my wife. And, at the end of the conversation, I told him I loved him. I'm sorry what he's going through. And he said that famous word that we always hear, or phrase from him, it is what it is. But at the end of the conversation, he said to me, pal, do the best you can do. That's what he would always say to us. Just do the best you can do. And that was Mike. And if you remember a couple years ago, we had a speaking class on the floor about how to deliver floor reports. Making sure that we made eye contact, we spoke from the heart, we didn't read, we knew what we were talking about. That was Mike. He wanted the best from each of us. He wanted to make sure we knew what we were doing and we believed in it. And he understood that, Maryland's a big state with a lot of different issues and regions, and we got to represent all of them. And he would make sure he watched out for the Eastern Shore on issues, or Western Maryland, or Baltimore City. I mean, that was him. He loved this state. And as I close here, the one thing I'll say is he loved history, and there's no doubt we knew that. I mean, the way he could tell the stories of the signers of the Declaration, or you go into the old Senate chamber, he made history come to life, and it was amazing. And sometimes you'd sit there and you close your eyes, it was like you were there, even though you weren't. And you wondered what it was like, but with the way Mike would tell you, it made you feel that way. And as I think of that, I think of a quote from Dr. Seuss. Don't cry because it's over, smile because it happened. And I say that because I know many of us have cried over the last week, knowing that he's gone. But I smile because